The metrics that we often use to measure whether we're actually mature or not are measuring the wrong thing. The metric for maturity is always love. The health of the person's God image, or how you actually experience God, it acts like a ceiling for maturity into Christ likeness. The only thing that changes the human heart is the love of God. But not, oh yeah, memorize that verse. Yeah, 1 John 4:8, 1 John 4:16, woo, God is love, yay. Everybody's like, oh dude, yay, gold star, you're mature, woo. There's a big difference between affirming the reality that God is love and actually knowing the God who is love. You will not change until you move into, not know about, but move toward and even into the triune reality of the love of God. And here is the point that you guys paid top dollar to come see. It's going to be on the test. All right, I'm finna show you a video, and this video will disorient you. So, and I don't say that as like a I'm gonna get you. You know, it's more of a warning, honestly, more than anything. And so the video will disorient you. Before I show it, though, I'm gonna give you a couple of pointers. One is, whenever you're watching it, you're gonna have a lot of thoughts for sure. All right, and I'm gonna encourage you, get out of your head and into your body. Okay, out of your head and into your body. What I mean by that is, pay attention to what's going on inside of you in an embodied way. So like, if your chest tenses up, if your shoulders tense up, if your palms start sweating, whatever that is, just pay attention to what's going on inside of you, all right? So I'm gonna show this and then we'll debrief it a little bit, all right? Hopefully this will work. Here we go.
Babies this young are extremely responsive to the emotions and the reactivity and the social interaction that they get from the world around them. This is something that we started studying 30, 40 years ago, when people didn't think that infants could engage in social interaction. In the still face experiment, what the mother did was she sits down and she's playing with her baby, who's about a year of age. And she gives a greeting to the baby gives a greeting back to her. This baby starts pointing at different places in the world, and the mother's trying to engage her and play with her. They're working to coordinate their emotions and their intentions, what they want to do in the world. And that's really what the baby is used to. And then we ask the mother to not respond to the baby. The baby very quickly picks up on this. And then she uses all of her abilities to try and get the mother back. She smiles at the mother. She points because she's used to the mother looking where she points. The baby puts both hands up in front of her and says, "What's happening here?" She makes that screechy sound at the mother, like, "Come on, why aren't we doing this?" Even in this 2 minutes, when they don't get the normal reaction, they react with negative emotions, they turn away, they feel the stress of it, they actually lose control of their posture because of the stress that they're experiencing.
I'm here. And what are you doing? Oh, yes. Oh, my girl.
It's a little like the good, the bad, and the ugly. The good is that normal stuff that goes on, that we all do with our kids. The bad is when something bad happens, but the infant can overcome it. After all, when you stop the still face, the mother and the baby start to play again. The ugly is when you don't give the child any chance to get back to the good. There's no reparation, and they're stuck in that really ugly. Babies.
Okay. All right, let's check in. What are you present to right now in your body? Do what? Clenched fists. Good. What do you think's behind that? What's your name? Sherry. What do you think's behind that, Sherry? Yeah, a lot of stressors. When the mom went away and came back but was gone, how many of y'all immediately felt the stress of that? Raise your hand. All right. You totally did. Why? Because you're a human. Like, the mother was present, but she was gone. And we as human beings are wired for connection. Like not like, oh yeah, like the mother physically was there, but she was gone. And the child immediately knew that, and so did you. What else are you present to? All right. What's your name? Leslie. Leslie? Awesome. Unpack that for us. What do you think is, you're just feeling it?
It may be deep, it may be something from my childhood.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, the heaviness, like I'm watching this, but then I'm also watching this. Like, I'm watching my life in a lot of ways. What else? How many of y'all felt relief when the mom came back? Right? By show of hands, how many of y'all are mothers in here? All right, quite a few of the ladies. What? Definitely not dudes in this day and age. All right, just clarified. But quite a few of you are mothers. How many of y'all like kind of empathize with the mom to go, man, that would have been really hard to do that, right? It's very like, what is happening right now? There's something about it that's just wrong. Totally. When the mom came back, though, what did you feel?
Relief.
Do what?
Relief.
Relief. Totally. It was like, hey, we're going to do this again. Now you're back. Right? She didn't physically go anywhere, but she came back. And the child knew that. I mean, as soon as the mother came back, the child was, and that reparation it took, what, a split second? Right? For the child to go, what are we doing? What are we doing? Oh, there you are. You're back. All right, let's play some more. Over the last, I guess 10 years, one of the things that prompted me to launch out and begin to serve the broader Big C church is I did my doctoral work at Biola University. Any Californians in here? All right, a couple people, good. At Biola University, and I did my doctoral dissertation on how people emotionally or experientially relate to God. And what I found lined up with a handful of other studies that show that 77% of people have some sort of insecure, distorted, emotional, experiential relationship with God. Which means, and the three primary ways that most people relate to God are either that he's angry, which means he's really present and he's really ticked off. And so if you ask people, hey, what do you believe about God? They'll tell you, and it's orthodox, and they recite the creed, and everybody's great. But then when you ask them, hey, what does it feel like when you talk to God? What does God feel like to you? Then 32% of them would tell you, oh, I'm pretty sure he's angry at me. That's just the default. That's where they start. The second one is that God is distant. He might be happy, but he's not present. He's not present. This is kind of like, we call this the president God. It's like, yeah, the president's great, but good luck getting an appointment with him. Like, if you go to the White House, you don't get in. Like, maybe every once in a blue moon, somebody might come and you might get a minute with the president, but He's just gone. He's unavailable. A lot of times I hear this when people talk about, hey, God just feels really distant right now. My prayers aren't getting past the ceiling, like all those kinds of different things when God feels like that to people. And then lastly, that God is critical, which means that God is not present and he's not happy. I call this the Geico God. Have you guys seen the Geico commercials where, especially the one that sticks with me for whatever reason, I don't know. It's probably, I need to probably figure that out psychoanalytically, but they're like, hey, we love our new house, but it has ants. And there's these women, the ants are walking around and they're criticizing everything, right? Expired, expired, expired. It's just like, geez, that's the Geico God. Like everything you do, like wrong, wrong, wrong. Now, nobody is actually saying this. Nobody's actually saying like, this is my stated creed, that I believe God is critiquing every single thing that I do. But when you start to examine how they're actually functioning with God, that is 100% their functional creed. So 77%, and if you're a math person, you add all that up, you're like, that's not 77%. That's because 5% of people responded that they were not even able to accept their emotional projection of who they believe God to be. So that category fits into what we would call atheism or agnostic. A lot of trauma there. So you're like, man, 77% of people. All right. Well, then what do we do about it? Well, the first thing to do is to realize that church leaders, the statistics hold. 77% of church leaders have a distorted, to varying degrees, dysfunctional relationship with God. So when you tell them, hey guys, y'all just go off and pray, 77% of them are going, oh, I don't want to do that. Look, if you had to go pray to a God who is still-faced like the mom there, would you want to do that? No. And then the obligation that you feel to do that, even though you don't want to, creates an enormous amount of tension in your interior life. I don't want to, but I'm supposed to want to, but I don't want to. But I want to. It gets crazy. What's interesting is when I did this research, I used Watermark was my lab. Thank you. And I selected 20 people that fit our demographic. And I selected 10 people who were exemplars. And what I mean by exemplars is I polled the staff, which is great because we've got like 500 people on staff, which is crazy. And so got all these names back. And I said, hey, nominate 3 exemplars and 3 non-exemplars. And the way I described the categories was exemplars are people that they're serving, they're faithful, and they can lead the ministry. Even if you have an emergency and have to leave, they're good. You're good with it. Non-exemplars they're always in a ditch. And if they're there, you just kind of keep your eye on them, because only God knows what's going to happen. So those are exemplars and non-exemplars. Now, these people didn't know which category they fit in. I didn't tell them. All right, all you non-exemplars, come here. But when I took them through the assessment, which was a really, I don't have time to go into all of it, but it was a robust assessment. Then what I found was between the exemplar and non-exemplar categories, there was only a slight variation in spiritual maturity between these people. Even though one of them was really good at ministry and the other one not so much. But when it came to actual spiritual maturity, there was only a slight increase in the exemplar category. The other super interesting thing I found was the biggest distinction between the exemplars and non-exemplars is the non-exemplars were actually honest about their relationship with God. What I found is most exemplars or most ministry people, whether it was through seminary or ministry activism or just experience over time, had developed really robust coping strategies to use God to hide from God. It was all over the place. All over the place. Sorry, dude, you got some spit on you right there. Sorry about that. You look like you can handle it, though, to be honest. But so many people were using the skills that they had gained in order to posture themselves defensively against God. It's super interesting. So what are the implications of this? Well, a lot. One is there's a leader maturity crisis in the church, without a doubt. I mean, dude, just read the headlines. You know, not the headlines are indicative of everything that's going on. But this is enough, it's systemic enough that I'm like, hey, something is off. Like the water that we're swimming in is polluted in some way. And if you've been swimming in it your whole life, then as like a fish doesn't know what water is, it's just been swimming in it, right? And so part of this is like just recognizing that this is a thing. Secondly, the metrics that we often use to measure whether we're actually mature or not are measuring the wrong thing. They totally are. We're measuring things like, hey, how much do you know? What kind of degree do you have? Yeah. How well are you able to communicate this? How well can you lead a team? How well can you lead a small group? Are you able to communicate and walk along? Are you charismatic enough to get people to follow you? Like, these are the metrics that most people use to try to figure out, are we healthy or not? At the very best, those will tell you like what kind of skill sets you have on your team, but they cannot even come close to measuring the actual spiritual health of the individual. And most of the time, what it ends up doing is gives you a false sense of health. Oh, dude, we're killing it. We are killing, we're crushing it. What's fascinating too, and it gets the metrics we use can actually keep people from substantive transformation, because they will begin to rely on all of those coping strategies instead of moving toward God. They end up looking at him like the child with the still-faced mother. They'll look at God and do all kinds of things to position themselves in certain defensive maneuvers to stay safe from God, but they won't actually move toward him. Wow. And unless you move toward God, you're not going to change. If the issue is not addressed, it's definitely going to significantly impact the health of the church. It already is, frankly. And it's going to adversely affect the church's witness to the world. Here's the question. Does the world look at the church and say, man, that group of people is known by the way that it loves? Anybody? What did Jesus say? You will be known by the way that you love. If we are not known in the world by the way that we love, something is drastically and tragically off. The metric for maturity is always love. Always. All right, some people might be like, dude, all right, you maybe convinced me that there maybe is something a little bit off. How did we get here? Like how did we get to the spot where everybody is swimming in the same water and nobody's really raising a flag about it, right? Well, let me suggest 3 different things, and I'll fly through this because there's more to get to, but this will generally give you an idea. So 1517, our German buddy, Martin Luther, you know, little Catholic monk, goes and nails the 95 Theses on the church door in Wittenberg, Germany. Everybody ever been there before? Anybody been to the church? All right, well, there you go. I love it. I want to go there. It's on my bucket list. So yay for Martin Luther. The primary aim of the Protestant Reformation was not just to reform the impurities that had gotten into the doctrine of the church or the practice of the church, but then Luther and others like him became almost obsessed with getting the biblical text into the hands of everyday people, right? So you have the advent of the printing press, And then right on the tails of that, you have this Protestant Reformation, the printing of the Gutenberg Bible and the printing of the Geneva Bible. And now the Bibles are starting to go, which is like a complete revolution. It's awesome. It's amazing. It's a really rich part of our history. The consequence of this, though, is, hey, if we can get a Bible into the hands of every believer and purify our doctrine, then we're good. Right? So that becomes the emphasis for, frankly, a couple hundred of years. Then on the tail end of that, you have the Enlightenment. And this is where the rise of rationalism, or basically, hey, we can use our intellect to figure out our problems and then use the technology that we have to solve our problems. So that truth really becomes something that that we gain through information. This is deeply Platonic, or Plato was a huge part of this. But through the Enlightenment, you have, hey, if we can figure it out, then we can use the technology to fix it, which brings about the scientific age, right? And then you have the revivalism of the 19th and 20th centuries, which basically is just ministry activism. Like, hey, just go stump preaching. You have your circuit riders in the Americas. You have, things like the Cane Ridge Revival in Kentucky, which is awesome. If you haven't ever read about that, you should go read about it. But you have, and then out of that, you have all of these colleges and universities, right, where the ministries are pulling up and bringing in this information. And what ends up happening, and I don't think it's I don't think any of this was intended. I think it was something that just happened unintentionally, is an anthropology began to form. In other words, what is a human being? An anthropology began to form that was really dangerous. And the first point about this is people began to assume that humans are primarily thinking things. So like Benjamin Franklin, thanks Ben for the US of A, right? So Benjamin Franklin was known for saying the only purpose for the body is to carry around the brain, right? So like, we're just like, we're primarily cerebral. Information is really critical. René Descartes was big in this. In fact, Jamie Smith, who wrote You Are What You Love and a bunch of other stuff, he said, "You are what you think" is a motto that reduces human beings to brains on a stick. Ironically, such thinking thingisms assures that the heart of the person is in mind. "I think, therefore I am," Descartes said. And most of our approaches to discipleship end up parroting his idea. Which means, from a discipleship standpoint, if our biblical anthropology or our theory of change is that people are primarily thinking people, then what do our discipleship methods attempt to do? Get people the right information. We assume that if we get people the right information, that they will be equipped to change. Wow. Like that is a fundamental foundation of all of the things that we just talked about. The Protestant Reformation, the Enlightenment, the ministry activism of the 19th and 20th centuries. You like all of the things, like just get people information. But then secondly, we began to believe, because we think that people are thinking things, that humans actually yield to direct attempts to change them. So in other words, we think, if I can get you the right information and then pressure you enough to do a certain thing, then you will change. Right? So this shows up most often in discipleship methodologies where it's like, hey, the Bible says to do this. And so now you have the right information. Now just do it, right? And you're like, man, that was really easy. Except what? Nobody's doing it, right? I mean, even the people who say that they're doing it are not actually doing it. Or if they're doing it for all the daggum wrong reasons, right? Simeon Zoll, in an essay he wrote on how do people actually change, he said the human heart is very hard to change. It strongly resists direct efforts to change it. I mean, just go tell your kid or your friend or whatever, like, you should change, and see what happens, right? if your theory of change depends in any way on the idea that telling someone what is wrong with them will lead them to changing what is wrong with them, you will be sorely ineffective. Thirdly, humans mature as they discipline themselves for the purpose of godliness. Like, this is the environment I grew up in. Hey, Nathan, discipline yourself for the purpose of godliness. And I'm like, all right, let's get after it. Now, the way I read that, or the way I interpreted it, was get to work, know the Bible, and then discipline myself personally, and I will spiritually mature, right? And it took me a long time to actually realize that that's not what that verse is talking about. Right? This doesn't have anything to do with your personal discipline bringing about any kind of transformation in your life. Someone attempting to bring about maturity in their life through their personal discipline fundamentally misunderstands the gospel. You got a Pharisee on your hands. Which begs the question, what about the daggum heart? Who's talking about the heart? There are two major ingredients at play here. One is called what I'll call, and it's not me, it's the literature talks about it like this, but it's called your God concept. And your God concept is basically everything that you explicitly think. This is your conscious, rational. This is the thing that allows you to get an A on a theology exam. You know, you sit down and it's slow processing. You're thinking about it. It's very analytic. You're like, what is God really like? Like that, you're doing primarily left brain cognitive thinking when you're thinking about God in these ways, right? But then there's this whole other piece in your relationship with God, which is what I call the God of the gut. And this is your implicit, subconscious, this is your emotional, experiential relationship with God. And it's unique to you. So every single one of there's probably, I don't know, 150 people or so in here. There's 150 different representations of God sitting in this room. And we're all talking about the same God. But we relate to him differently based on your environment, based on your formative experiences, based on the patterns of relating that you formed from wee years, right? It's the part of you when you were watching that with the still face kid and something hit you in the gut because you were like, oh, that's me. Right? That's what I'm talking about. It's completely implicit. For most people, the vast majority of people, it's completely unexamined. They don't even know that it's necessarily there. Right? Because God for them, that's what's been drilled into them for so long is information, 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 the latest tips and tricks. Hey, go do the thing, work really hard to do it, right? And then we do, because we're dutiful sons and daughters. And we're like, man, we're here to serve the king, I'm a slave, here we go, right? And we'll churn and churn and churn, and it works until it doesn't. And when it doesn't, it completely collapses. And you find that the ground you've been standing on is totally shifting sand. All right, it looks something like this. So this is the God representation. We are all born into an attachment environment where we relate primarily to one or two attachment figures, primarily attachment figures. But there are other people involved, like brothers and sisters. You may have a coach, you may have somebody but as soon as you're born into an environment, you're born into an environment that on some level is unsafe. And because it's unsafe, you begin, again, subconsciously, it's completely implicit, you begin to form patterns of relating that posture you with your attachment figure in either secure ways or insecure ways. And in insecure attachment, what people will do is they'll say, hey, I'm going to keep you over there because you're not safe for me to get close to. And then you begin to form patterns of relating that everything's good until something becomes unsafe, and then you just leave. Like that's your knee-jerk reaction to conflict or difficulty or whatever is, this is no longer comfortable, I'm out. It's called avoidant attachment. Or you'll get really close to the attachment figure and pull the levers. You're trying to like Oz behind the curtains. Whoop, 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 whoop. or like the Inside Out movie, you know, like pushing all the buttons, trying to manipulate the environment so that you can control the person that you're relating to, which creates an enormous amount of anxiety inside of you. And then you form that pattern of relating as a child, and then guess what? Our patterns of relating are remarkably stable over time, which means it's almost certainly, unless there's been some sort of intervention, you almost certainly are relating like that now. And guess who you relate to like that the most? God, or your representation of God. What's really fascinating about this, there's so many things that are fascinating about it. But what's so fascinating about this is in the process of belief. So now I'm talking about not just the information that you happen to affirm about God. I'm talking about what you actually believe. The core center part of your life that is spilling out in your actions. In the process of belief, our implicit, subconscious, emotional God image is primary. It's primary. While our explicit, conscious, relational God concept is secondary. That's massive. There are all kinds of reasons that we could do an entire daggone workshop on this, times 3, to show why this is the case. But this is not an opinion. This is like neurobiological, this is just fact, right? The way that information flows in your body, before you're ever a thinking creature, you're first a feeling one. And guess what? The vast majority of our discipleship methodologies have completely ignored how you feel. But how you feel, and it totally plays into your experience of something, which colors everything. So when there is a difference between what you intellectually believe, your God concept about God, and how you actually experience God, your emotional experience wins out every single time. It's like, well, no, man, just believe. God's not really like that. Just believe different. And the person's like, okay, I'll believe different. And you're like, okay, well, that didn't work. Maybe try this verse on. And they're like, oh, maybe that'll work. Oh, well, that didn't work. Well, maybe try this program. Well, maybe you should memorize the scriptures more. Maybe I'll say the verse slower and louder. It doesn't work. The health of the person's God image, or how you actually experience God, it acts like a ceiling for maturity into Christ likeness. And here is the point that you guys paid top dollar to come see. It's going to be on the test. You will never, ever grow beyond the health of your God image. Which means, and believe me, guys, I'm in this. I'm in the academic community, right? I know the dudes that have 3 PhDs and teach. They've been teaching for decades, mentoring, doing all this stuff, right? And they have literally all of the information in the world at their disposal. And on a scale of 1 to 10, their God image is a 3. Guess how mature they are? A 3. They know all about these things, but they're not mature in love. If we don't address the interior life of the human person in our discipleship methods, the best you can hope for is superficial change. And people are like, man, why don't our people grow? Like, we're doing all these things. Why don't the people grow? And it's like, man, we've got to examine our theory of change. How do you think a person grows? Do you think getting them more information is going to help them grow? I mean, it will help them grow, but do you think it's going to force them to grow or be the key that unlocks their growth? No, it's not. We have to reconsider. So this is a biblical theory of change. One is humans are primary relational, right? You are not a brain on a stick. You are not even primarily a thinking thing. You are an experiencing thing. That is who you are, period. God made you like that because why? God is triune, Father, Son, and Spirit, has joyfully existed as a community of love for eternity. God is love, period. You are created in the image of God, who is inherently relational. As such, the quality of your life will be the quality of your relationships, period. So like, we've got to address this from a, hey, how are we relating? What's your relational style? How have you been formed in your relational style? And then ultimately, how is that mapping over onto ultimately your relationship with God? You are primarily relational. Secondly, humans grow in a safe, secure environment of grace, not judgment. If you should examine your preaching calendar, and because you got to realize, guys, I mean, when I did the research on this, what's fascinating is out of the focus group that I took through, there was 20 of them. Out of the 20 people, 60% of them had been significantly abused in some way, either physically or sexually or prolonged emotional abuse, which the longitudinal studies have shown that prolonged emotional abuse has the same psychologically damaging effect on a human that sexual abuse has. It's super fascinating, right? Which means 60% of you guys have been abused. So like when I stand up here and teach, like that absolutely colors to where I'm like, guys, he loves you. So if we examine our preaching schedules, and what we find is really heavy emphasis on exegesis, or really heavy emphasis on biblical imperatives, or really heavy emphasis on, hey, you got to do these things, get to work. If you don't get to work, you may not even be a Christian. It's like, oh, stop. Just stop. People, the heart is resistant to change, and people have an enormous amount of difficulty actually accepting the reality that God loves them. It's just true. So for every imperative sermon you give, you better give like 4 or 5 just on the indicative that God loves you. Humans only change as they have the ongoing lived experience of being loved by God. The only thing that changes the human heart is the love of God. But not, oh yeah, memorize that verse. Yeah, 1 John 4:8, 1 John 4:16, woo, God is love, yay. Everybody's like, oh dude, yay, gold star, you're mature, woo. There's a big difference between affirming the reality that God is love and actually knowing the God who is love. You will not change until you move into, not know about, but move toward and even into the triune reality of the love of God. The primary aim of our discipleship efforts should be to integrate both the intellectual. So if you walk out of here and you go, man, that dude's against education, he's against Bible study, he's against Bible knowledge, he's against biblical imperatives, then you've completely missed what I'm saying, all right? I have 3 theological degrees and live in that world, okay? Nobody is more for it than I am. I'm just saying we have made it the linchpin for maturity for far too long. And it's a reductionistic way of thinking about the human person. And so if we're going to do this, we have to integrate both the intellectual and the experiential knowledge that people may know the love of Christ that surpasses knowledge. What? How do you know something that you can't know? Wow. Seriously, I'm asking. How do you know something that's beyond what you can know? You experience it. Have you ever, like I have small children, so Nate, we had Six Flags season passes last year. And he wanted to ride Mr. Freeze. You guys rode Mr. Freeze? Anybody? All right. So, no, sir. I feel you, bro. So Nate, we go in there, and Nate's, we're staying in the queue or the line, and we get up there, and Nate's like, this is going to be awesome. I'm going to blah, blah, blah. And we get up to the actual where we're next in line, and he freaks out, right? He like, Daddy, this is not a good idea. And I was like, hey, dude, and I leaned in. I was like, hey, bro, I mean, I totally could have like broken out the owner's manual and been like, here's all the safety checks and blah, 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 blah. But what he needed in that moment was my actual experiential presence with him. I was like, hey, dude, I've ridden this ride. I promise you're not going to regret it. I will be with you the whole time, right? And so he got the courage enough to get on the daggum train, and we sat in the very back car where we launched out of the tube backwards. So when you're hanging up at the top, we were the highest you could be. And Nate, he's sitting right next to me. Of course, I'm the bigger dude, so my arm's over, and I mean, he is clutching my arm. And I was like, hey, bro, literally right before they hit the button, I was like, hey, just enjoy the ride. And he's, and then boom. Well, you go, it takes you all kinds of craziness. And by the time we were hanging, looking down, where you can see Fort Worth over there and Dallas over there, you're like looking straight down, and Nate had his eyes closed, and I was like, Nate, open your eyes. And he did, right? He's like, ah! Right? If I had asked him right after, hey, dude, I want you to write a little short essay on that. We put some words on that experience. He would have said, whatever words I put to it will not what? Do it justice. It's beyond his knowledge. It's beyond his ability to put that into some kind of logical, linear, coherent story. It is the experience of the height and the width and the depth and the length of the love of God. You can only say so much about this, and then you must be quiet before the glory of God. Look, guys, are we taking people there? If not, what are we doing? Seriously, what are we doing? It looks like this. So the circle down here is your representation of God, right? Now, the great news, and this is another thing that's like price of admission, the great news is the way you represent God in your mind and your experience, right? That's B. Guess what's A? A is actually God. So like, I have a representation of this stool right here, right? I can represent it in my mind. I actually have relationships with stools because I sit in them. And so if the stool collapses while I'm teaching you guys, that would affect my relationship with stools, right? It would give me an experience of the stool that's not good. And so I have a representation that's totally malleable, right? It's just that 3 out of 4 people, when they sat in the stool collapsed. So they have real negative experiences with stools, right? What I'm saying, though, is your representation of the stool is not the stool. It's not the chair. Like, regardless of what you believe about who God is, or whether he's angry with you or distant from you or critical of you, that doesn't actually make it so. Guess what, guys? He's not. He's not angry at you. Like, whatever anger was rightly poured out on sin was poured out on his son. And the reason his son went to the cross to take that is because he's like, for the joy set before him. Why? He saw what you could be. And he was like, oh, I'm going after that. He's not angry at you. He's not distant from you. Like, God literally, Jesus says, hey, I'm going to go. And when I go, that's good because I'm going to send somebody else. And he's not just going to be with you. He's going to be where? In you. Like, saying that God is distant from you is like saying that water is not wet. Like, what? He is closer to you than you know, which is why Brother Lawrence said, you need not cry very loud. He's closer to you than you're aware. He's not critical of you. You're his masterpiece. He knows more about you than you know. He rejoices over you with singing. And you're like, man, I realize that you're saying all that stuff, but really? And I'm like, once you know how you have those moments when like, it feels like the clouds part and the sun comes in and you're like, oh, and you're like, oh, dude, God is so great. Do y'all see this? This is amazing. And it may only last for like 10 seconds. And then you're kind of back down and you're like, okay, it's time to get to work, whatever, right? You have these eureka moments. What I'm saying is when that happens and you have that experience, you're just starting to scratch the surface of it. It's infinitely better. That's God actual. God of God, light from light, true God of true God. That is who God is. Whether you believe that or not, it doesn't change the fact that that's who God is. Now, what the Holy Spirit is doing is like, look, I know that. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to come through this process of orientation, disorientation, and then reorientation. I'm going to destroy your representation of me, and I'm going to let all the wounded parts fall off, and then I'm going to reconstruct it to reorient you to where your representation of me is fuller and more accurate to the real thing. And that's not something that happens didactically. It doesn't happen when you just learn more information. That is an experience that you have. And then that's going to settle in, and then the Lord's going to go, yeah, it's still not, we're not there yet, brother, right? And what's really cool, guys, is for all of eternity, our representation of God will constantly be becoming more full, more robust, more accurate to the real thing, and we will never get to the end of God. This is the process of formation. And so the way forward is, look, guys, and I'm going to leave some time for some questions. You have got to prioritize the health of your own interior life. If you're in here thinking about somebody else, you're wrong. This is not for somebody else. This is for you. This is the primary thing we see with pastors who go through our leadership development year. They're constantly going, oh, dude, that was a great, dude, that'll preach. And then guess what you're going to find in pulpits on Sunday? A parroting of what I just said. Don't do it. Don't take the latest piece of technology or whatever and turn it into something that you can use. You're bastardizing it. Stop it. It's for you. If you don't do the work, if you don't do something, do the work to sit in it and be matured by the process of the Holy Spirit doing this in your life, you will never be able to take your body where you haven't already been. The best thing you can do for your body is prioritize the health of your own interior life. Do it. Do it. Make a significant investment in staff care. Don't assume that your staff is good. Almost inevitably, your staff is not good. Ask me how I know. They're not. Look, guys, that's not a bad thing. It just is. It just happens to be where they are. So I'll do questions in just a second. It just happens to be where they are. So like pretending like they're good to keep churning them out to do what you need them to do is not the thing that's going to ultimately serve your body. Thirdly, get trained in relational discipleship models. So there is training around this. There is help, right? And so at the end of the day, examining your theory of change, beginning to implement relational discipleship practices, shifting the way that things are talked about and what's emphasized and all of those things is a really positive step in the right direction. And then I think you can, once you've done that, then you integrate a relational theory of change into your ministry context, but only after you've done the work. And then lastly, I would say we can totally help. So if you're like, man, what do we do about this? Well, this is why we started Eden Project. In Eden, you have Yahweh, relational, divine, triune, Godhead, walking with his images in full relational wholeness in the cool of the day in his garden. Revelation 21 and 22, what do you see? Eden fulfilled, Eden restored, relational wholeness, God with his people. You don't need a temple there because God's there with them, face to face, wiping away their tears. Relational wholeness. Everything in between that we're doing right now is God's Eden project. It's his work that he is doing to cultivate in the interior life the reality of the height, width, depth, and length of his love. It's what he's doing. So if you're like, hey, what's God doing today? He is trying to convince you in deeper and deeper ways how much you're loved. Amen. That's what he's doing. You can scan the QR code. It's going to take you to a sign-up deal where we're going to do my staff team is going to do a live webinar next week. I believe it's going to be Thursday at 11. Is that right, Eric? Thursday at 11. You can sign up for that webinar here, and then we have a 10-month relational discipleship process that's designed primarily for staff. And the way that we would do this is go, hey, if you're a senior pastor, get you and your elders and go through the Eden Lead Year, right? Again, if one thing you have to do is sign off, is to go, I promise I will not teach this for 1 year. Because it's for you. And then through that process, you're going to begin to not only do the work yourself, you're going to integrate that stuff into the lives of the rest of your staff, who year 2 would go through it. And then by year 3, you're starting to really sow this deeply into the life and function of your body. So that's called our Eden Lead Year. We're doing a webinar about that on Thursday. And look, I don't do that. I don't stand up here to like pitch this and go, it's the Eden Project. I really do care. I care about this so much. Not because of something that needs to happen so that we can go change the world. I care about this because I care about you. Like, you are not a means to an end. You are not a tool to be used in God's toolkit. We are his masterpiece. And so my prayer for all of us is that we would live more deeply into that.